A pair of women's shoes. That's all it took. One unexpected visit, one question, one argument, and within minutes, a young Kenya Defense Forces soldier lay dying on the living room floor of the man she loved. But this story didn't end there, because instead of immediately calling for help, police say someone picked up a mop. Blood was cleaned, clothes were hidden, and a desperate attempt was allegedly made to erase what had just happened. But here's a question that has haunted this case ever since. How does a relationship between two people trained to protect life end in such unimaginable violence? This is the story of Corporal Esuron Phoebe Kaele.
Twisted tales in every folder. Truth runs hot while the trail gets colder. Crime dopers, we don't look away.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Crime Dopers, where crime meets truth. I'm your host, Wanja, and thank you for choosing to spend your time with me today. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge something. Today's episode involves intimate partner violence and the death of a young woman whose life ended far too soon. Our goal is not to sensationalize tragedy, it's to understand what happened, examine the facts that emerged through investigations and court proceedings, and remember the person at the center of this story. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse in a relationship, please know that help is available. Reaching out early can save lives. Now, let's go back to March 2022 to a quiet apartment in Mihango, because what happened inside those walls will become one of the most talked about crimes involving members of the Kenya Defense Forces. Corporal Esuron Phoebe Kaele wasn't just another headline. She was a serving member of the Kenya Defense Forces. According to the source material, she was stationed at Modika Garrison in Garissa. Military life isn't easy. It demands discipline, long deployments, time away from family, and the ability to perform under pressure. Those who serve often develop close relationships with fellow officers because they understand each other's unique experiences. That was true for Phoebe. She was reportedly in a relationship with another KDF soldier, Signal Private John Gitau. He was stationed at Modika Garrison. To many people around them, they appeared to be an ordinary military couple trying to make their relationship work despite being posted to different locations. But appearances rarely tell the whole story. And sometimes, the cracks only become visible when it's already too late. Now, here's something worth thinking about. Relationships involving long-distance postings come with their own challenges. Trust becomes everything, communication becomes everything, and uncertainty can slowly grow into suspicion if problems are left unresolved. We don't know every conversation Phoebe and John ever had. We don't know what promises they made to one another. But what we do know is this, that on one weekend in March 2022, Phoebe made a decision that would change everything. Instead of announcing her visit, she decided to surprise her boyfriend. At first glance, that doesn't sound unusual. People surprise their partners all the time. But this particular surprise will uncover something she never expected. And once that door opened, there will be no turning back. Now ask yourself, how many life-changing moments begin with something that seems completely ordinary? March 6th, 2022. For Phoebe, it probably started like any other journey. She was traveling to Nairobi to see someone she loved. Not for an official military assignment, not for work. She was going to surprise her boyfriend. According to the information available, Corporal Esuron Phoebe Kaele traveled from her station in Garissa to visit Signal Private John Gitau at his rented apartment in Mihango, Nairobi's Utawala area. Imagine that journey for a second. Maybe she was excited. Maybe she imagined spending time together after weeks apart. Perhaps she thought the visit would strengthen their relationship. We'll never know exactly what was on her mind, but we do know what happened next. As Phoebe approached the apartment, something immediately caught her attention. A pair of women's shoes sitting outside the door. To most people, that might not mean much, But if you're visiting your partner unexpectedly and you weren't expecting anyone else to be there, those shoes suddenly become impossible to ignore. Think about it. How many stories have started with a tiny detail everyone else would overlook? Not a text message, not a phone call, not a confession, just a pair of shoes. According to investigators, Phoebe questioned John Gitau about them as soon as she entered the house. And then, the situation became even more shocking. Police investigations later revealed that another woman was inside the apartment. She wasn't a visitor who had just stopped by. She wasn't hiding in the bedroom. Investigators identified her as another serving Kenya Defense Forces soldier attached to Kahawa Garrison. Now pause there for a moment. Imagine discovering that you're standing inside your partner's home. You've just noticed evidence suggesting someone else is there. Your questions aren't being answered, and then you realize there actually is another person inside. It's hard to imagine emotions not running high. Shock, confusion, betrayal, anger, heartbreak. Those are all very human reactions. But it's important to distinguish between what we know and what we don't. We know that there was an argument. We know another woman was present. We know tensions escalated. What we don't know are the exact words exchanged inside that apartment. No recording exists. No complete transcript exists. So anything beyond the established investigative record will simply be speculation. And that's something we avoid here on Crime Dopers because facts matter, especially when telling someone else's story. Here's another detail that often gets overshadowed. Both women were members of the Kenya Defense Forces. Both had gone through military training. Both understood discipline. Both understood conflict management. Yet, despite all of that, the situation spiraled completely out of control. It's a reminder that uniforms don't make people immune to emotional pain. Military personnel experience heartbreak, jealousy, relationship conflict, and emotional distress just like anyone else. The difference is that when emotions explode in confined spaces, the consequences can become irreversible within seconds. Now ask yourself this. Could this confrontation have ended differently if someone had walked away? If someone had left the room? If someone had called for help before tempers reached a breaking point? Those are the questions investigators can never fully answer. But they are questions worth asking. Because sometimes the smallest decisions made in a heated moment determines whether everyone walks away alive. Unfortunately, this isn't what happened here. Instead, according to investigators, the confrontation turned violent. And within moments, a young soldier who had arrived expecting to see someone she loved had suffered a devastating injury. The apartment that should have been a place of comfort became a crime scene. In the next bit, we'll examine what investigators say happened during those critical moments, the evidence recovered from the apartment, and why the actions taken immediately afterward became just as significant as the fatal stabbing itself. What happened inside that apartment over the next few minutes will change several lives forever. And while investigators were able to reconstruct parts of the incident through physical evidence and witness accounts, it's important to remember that only 3 people were present when the confrontation began. One of them never got the chance to tell her side of the story. According to the investigative record, the argument escalated into a physical confrontation. During that confrontation, John Gitau allegedly armed himself with a kitchen knife. Then, everything happened in an instant. Phoebe suffered a stab wound to her neck. It was a catastrophic injury. The neck contains some of the body's most vital blood vessels. Trauma to that area can cause rapid and severe blood loss, leaving very little time for medical intervention. For Phoebe, there will be no second chance, no opportunity to call her family, no opportunity to explain what had happened. Her life ended inside the apartment where she had gone to surprise someone she trusted. Take a moment to think about that. Just hours earlier, she had likely been making travel plans, perhaps packing a small bag, perhaps looking forward to seeing someone she cared about. She could never have imagined that this visit would become her final journey. It is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of intimate partner violence. The danger often comes from someone the victim knows, someone the victim trusts, someone they never expected will become the source of fatal harm. Now, here's where the investigation takes another troubling turn. If you've listened to Crime Dopers before, you know that investigators often pay just as much attention to what happens after a crime as they do to the crime itself, because those actions can reveal a great deal. According to investigators, rather than immediately preserving the scene exactly as it was, there was an attempt to clean parts of the apartment. Blood-stained clothing was also allegedly concealed inside the bathroom. Think about that for a second. If someone acts in self-defense, their first instinct is often to call for help, to report what happened, to seek medical assistance, but investigators believed the actions inside the apartment after the stabbing were consistent with an attempt to interfere with evidence. That became a significant issue as the case moved through the justice system. Now, it's worth emphasizing something here. The woman who had been inside the apartment was also arrested following the incident because investigators believed she had participated in efforts to alter the scene. However, the primary criminal responsibility for the fatal stabbing rested with John Gitau. Then came an unexpected twist. The case wasn't uncovered because neighbors had screams. It wasn't because someone walking by looked through a window. According to the available information, John Gitau contacted a fellow KDF colleague after the incident and admitted that he had killed his girlfriend. That colleague then alerted civilian police. That phone call will become one of the most significant moments in the entire investigation. Imagine receiving a call like that. What would you even say? Would you even think it's a joke? Would you believe what you were hearing? Or would you do exactly what that colleague reportedly did? Contact the authorities immediately. That decision ensured police were notified before more time passed and before the suspects could leave the scene. Sometimes justice begins with one person choosing to do the right thing. When officers arrived at the apartment, they found Phoebe's body inside. The apartment had become an active crime scene. Investigators documented the evidence, secured the area, and began piecing together what had happened in those critical minutes. For detectives, every detail mattered: the condition of the room, the location of the body, the alleged murder weapon, the blood patterns, the clothing. Every single piece of evidence will later contribute to reconstructing the sequence of events. Because unlike television dramas, real investigations aren't solved through dramatic confessions alone. They're built piece by piece, fact by fact, evidence by evidence. As detectives examined the scene, they concluded this was not simply a domestic disagreement that had spiraled unexpectedly. Instead, prosecutors argued that the evidence, including the fatal neck wound and the alleged efforts to clean the scene afterward, supported the conclusion that a serious criminal offense had occurred. Those issues later became central to the prosecution's case and to the court's assessment of the evidence. Now, here's something you have to ask yourself. How different might this story have been if someone had chosen to walk away from the argument, if someone had stepped outside to cool off, if someone had called for help before violence entered the picture? We'll never know. But those unanswered questions continued to linger long after the courtroom proceedings ended. For Phoebe's family, March 6th wasn't just another date on a calendar. It became the day their daughter, colleague, and loved one never came back home. And as investigators worked to build the case, another battle was just beginning: the fight for justice. When detectives left the apartment that day, they weren't leaving with answers. They were leaving with evidence. And in murder investigations, evidence is what speaks loudest. Because memories can fade, people can change their stories, but physical evidence often tells a different story. In the days that followed, detectives from the Directorate of Criminal Investigations worked alongside military authorities because everyone involved in the case was a serving member of the Kenya Defence Forces. The apartment in Mihango became the focal point of the investigation. Every photograph, every bloodstain, every recovered item, every statement, all of it will eventually form part of the prosecution's case. According to the information available, investigators alleged that the attempt to clean the scene and conceal blood-stained clothing became significant evidence in understanding what happened after Phoebe was fatally injured. Sometimes we become so focused on investigations that we forget what families experience. Imagine receiving that phone call, learning that someone you love, someone who wore the country's uniform, someone who had dedicated herself to service, was never coming back home. For Phoebe's loved ones, this wasn't just another criminal file. She was a daughter, a colleague, a friend, a woman whose future had been cut short. And like many families affected by violent crime, they had to begin grieving while simultaneously waiting for the justice system to do its work. That process isn't quick, no. It requires investigators to gather evidence, prosecutors to prepare a case, witnesses to testify, and judges to weigh every piece of evidence before reaching a decision. Justice often moves slowly, but it must also move carefully. As the case progressed through the military justice system, prosecutors argued that the evidence pointed to unlawful killing. The defense, however, challenged aspects of the prosecution's case. Later, John Gitau appealed his conviction and sentence. According to the available legal information, he argued that he had acted in self-defense and that his sentence was excessive, but the court disagreed. The appellate court upheld the conviction and the 30-year sentence, finding that the evidence did not support the claim of self-defense. The court also considered the nature of the fatal injury and the events following the stabbing, including the alleged attempts to interfere with the crime scene. That ruling sent a clear message. Claims of self-defense are carefully examined against the evidence. The court doesn't simply ask what someone says happened. It asks, does the physical evidence support that version? Do witness statements align? Does the conduct of the incident match the explanation being offered? Those questions are at the heart of every serious criminal trial. As I researched this case, a few details stood out because they rarely make the headlines. First, both the victim and the accused were serving soldiers. These were individuals trained in discipline, conflict management, and responsibility. Yet training alone cannot prevent personal conflicts from escalating if emotions are left unchecked. Second, it wasn't sophisticated forensic technology that first alerted authorities. It was a colleague who reported receiving a confession and chose to notify police immediately. That decision may have prevented further destruction of evidence. And third, this case reminds us that intimate partner violence does not discriminate. It affects people from every profession, every income level, every community. Even institutions built on discipline and order are not immune. Whenever we cover cases like this on Crime Dopers, I think it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture. Because Phoebe's story is not just about one tragic afternoon. It's part of a wider conversation about relationship violence. Many abusive relationships don't begin with physical violence. They often begin with control, manipulation, isolation, repeated dishonesty, explosive arguments, threats, small warning signs that become easier to recognize only in hindsight. That doesn't mean every troubled relationship becomes violent. Far from it. But it does remind us that unresolved conflict, that is jealousy and controlling behavior, should never be ignored. If a relationship repeatedly makes you feel unsafe, that feeling matters. If someone threatens you, believe them. If you're constantly afraid of how someone will react, reach out to someone you trust. Seeking help is not weakness. It's an act of courage. Before this became a criminal case, before it became a court file, before it became a headline, there was a woman named Phoebe, a daughter, a soldier, a colleague, a Kenyan who had chosen a life of service, and that's how she deserved to be remembered, not simply as a victim, but as a person whose life mattered. Cases like this are never easy to talk about, but they're important, because every time we tell these stories with care and accuracy, we remind ourselves that behind every statistic is a human life. If today's episode resonated with you, I want to leave you with one Crime Doper's life rule. Never ignore repeated signs that a relationship is becoming unsafe. Love shall never require fear, intimidation, or violence. If you know someone who may be experiencing abuse, don't assume someone else will help. Check in, listen without judgment, encourage them to seek support. Sometimes one conversation can change the course of a life. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. What lessons do you think we as a society should take away from Phoebe's story? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. If you found this episode informative, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Crime Dopers, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Sharing these stories responsibly helps keep the conversation about justice, accountability, and prevention alive. Thank you for spending time with me. I'm Onja, and this has been Crime Dopers, where crime meets truth. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, stay alert. Look out for one another, and never stop seeking the truth.
Crime Dopers. We don't look away.